For 7 years, he had been invisible, a man with no name, no history, no future, just the weight of rain on tattered fabric and the cold indifference of a city that had forgotten how to see him. He slept under bridges that echoed with the roar of traffic above. He ate from bins behind restaurants where chefs never looked him in the eye. He existed in the margins, a shadow moving through crowds of people who stepped around him like he was part of the pavement. No one knew that beneath the grime and the hollow silence lived a man who had once commanded armies. No one could have imagined that the trembling hands that begged for spare change had once held the seal of a nation. No one suspected that his silence was not the silence of a broken mind, but the silence of a man carrying an impossible secret, a secret that would destroy everyone he had ever loved if it were ever discovered. But secrets have a way of surfacing. And on a rainy November evening, when a woman's act of kindness was witnessed by the wrong person, everything changed. His past did not return gently. It came like thunder, like justice, like a reckoning he had spent 7 years trying to escape. And in that moment, the world would learn that sometimes the most invisible people among us are the ones carrying the heaviest crowns. This is a story about a man who chose exile over power, and what happens when the world finally discovers who he really is. Chapter 1. Beneath the bridge, the underpass smelled like rust and forgotten things. Marcus, though that was not his real name, and everyone called him by no name at all, sat with his back against the concrete pillar, watching the rain fall in diagonal sheets under the highway lights. His coat was the color of old water, his shoes had holes worn through the soles, his beard was matted, streaked with grey, that made him look older than his 52 years. A young man in a business suit hurried past, deliberately widening his path. Marcus watched him go without emotion. This was the rhythm of the city, avoidance, disgust, the quickening of steps. He had stopped expecting eye contact years ago. He pulled the plastic bag closer to his body, his only possession besides the clothes he wore. Inside were 3 paperback books, a photograph he kept turned face down, and a wooden object wrapped in cloth that he never unwrapped in public. He held the bag like it contained his entire soul. Perhaps it did. The rain intensified. Marcus did not move. He had learned that movement drew attention, and attention was dangerous. Here under the bridge he was safe. Here he was no one, and being no one was the only way to stay alive. Above him the city hummed. Somewhere in those towers of glass and steel, people made decisions that moved millions. Somewhere, in offices that smelled like leather and power, men and women wielded influence like weapons. Marcus had once been among them. He had sat in rooms where whispers changed the course of nations. He had held people's lives in the palm of his hand. That life was dead. He had killed it deliberately with methodical precision and buried it so deep that no one could ever dig it up. Or so he thought. The rain drummed against the concrete, a rhythm like a heartbeat. Marcus closed his eyes and listened. In that sound, he heard voices, the voices of people he had abandoned, people who were probably searching for him still, people who would never understand why a man would choose to lose everything. A sound interrupted his thoughts. Footsteps, but not the quick, dismissive footsteps of someone hurrying past. These were slow, careful, almost cautious. Marcus opened his eyes. A woman stood at the edge of the underpass, shaking water from an umbrella. She was perhaps 40, with tired eyes and a face that had learned kindness the hard way. She wore a simple coat and carried 2 bags of food. She looked directly at Marcus, not through him, not around him, but at him, and her expression did not change into disgust. "It's getting worse," she said simply. "The rain." Marcus did not respond. Speaking was dangerous. Words could reveal things, an accent, an education, a history. "I brought extra," she continued, setting one of the bags near him. "Soup, still warm. There's bread, too." She waited as if expecting gratitude. When none came, she simply nodded and turned to walk deeper into the underpass, where she knew 3 other homeless men sheltered. This woman came twice a week, always with extra food, always with the same quiet respect. Her name was Sarah. She volunteered at a nearby shelter. She had never asked Marcus his name or his story. He watched her go, then pulled the bag toward him and opened it carefully. Steam rose from the container of soup. The bread was soft, still warm from an oven. Marcus held the spoon but did not eat. He stared at the soup as if it were an oracle, as if it might reveal something he needed to know. His hands were shaking, not from cold, but from something deeper. Something was stirring beneath the surface of his carefully constructed invisibility. Something was waking up. He did not know yet that his past was moving toward him through the rain-soaked streets like a predator sensing prey. He did not know that his final year of freedom was counting down to its last weeks. He did not know that Sarah's simple act of kindness had been witnessed by someone who had been searching for him for 7 long years. He knew only that the soup was warm, and that for the first time in years he felt something other than numbness. He felt afraid. Chapter 2. The woman who remembered across the city, in a penthouse apartment that looked down on the streets like a throne room gazing upon peasants. Another woman stared at a photograph. It was old, printed on paper that had yellowed with time. In the photograph, a man in military dress stood beside a fountain, his posture perfect, his face confident, his eyes holding secrets that no camera should have been able to capture. She had been searching for him for so long that she had almost stopped believing he was real. Almost. Her name was Amara, and she had been a diplomat in the government he had left behind. She had been young then, idealistic, in love with the idea of serving something greater than herself. She had been at his side during the final days before his disappearance. She had watched him destroy his own identity with methodical precision, burning bridges, erasing records, leaving nothing but a ghost behind. She had never understood why. The investigation had been quiet, contained, kept secret from the public. A king did not simply vanish without explanation. A man who held the authority of an entire nation did not simply walk away into exile, but he had. And in the years that followed, Amara had pieced together fragments, hints, whispers from people who had known him. She had followed leads across 3 continents. She had studied the faces of homeless men in a dozen cities, hoping one of them would match the photograph. And then, last week, she had received a tip from a volunteer at a shelter, a woman named Sarah, an unusual request, almost casual. Had Amara ever heard of a man who lived under the bridge on 5th and Main? A man who never spoke, never asked for anything, who seemed to be hiding from something? Amara had gone to that underpass herself, disguised in worn clothes, and she had seen him. Just for a moment. Just enough to confirm what she had begun to suspect. It was him. After 7 years, it was him. Now she sat in her penthouse, holding the photograph, watching the rain streak the windows, and trying to decide what to do. Bringing him back would destroy the careful equilibrium of a nation that had learned to move forward without him. It would expose secrets that people had died to protect. It would put his life in danger. But leaving him in exile, living as a ghost under a bridge, seemed like a cruelty that no one deserved. Amara pulled out her phone and made a decision. She would contact him. Not today, not yet, but soon. And she would give him a choice that he had never been given before, the choice to reclaim his life or the choice to finally rest. She did not know yet that his past was already moving toward him through other channels, through other people who had been searching just as long. She did not know that her decision would set off a cascade of events that would change everything. She knew only that the man in the photograph had once been a king and that it was time for him to come home. Chapter 3. The child who saw on the streets above the underpass, a boy of no more than 8 years old, moved through the crowds with the skill of someone who had learned early how to be invisible. His name was David, and he had lived on these streets for 3 years. His mother had abandoned him at a bus station when he was 5, and since then he had belonged to no one but the city itself. David knew every corner, every shadow, every person who might offer food or danger. He knew which restaurants threw away the best food, which shops would call the police if he tried to sleep in their doorways, which homeless people could be trusted and which could not. He had noticed the man under the bridge, because the man was different. Most homeless people moved in patterns of desperation, urgent, anxious, reaching out. But this man sat perfectly still, as if he were meditating, as if the world around him did not exist. David had watched him for weeks, fascinated by this stillness, this intentional erasure of self. Today, David was hungry. His last meal had been 2 days ago, a half-eaten sandwich he had found in a trash can. His ribs showed through his shirt, his lips were chapped. He was beginning to feel that familiar fading, the way hunger sometimes made the world seem distant and dreamlike. He crouched near the underpass entrance and watched the woman named Sarah deliver food to the homeless men. He saw her give a bag to the man under the bridge. He saw something happen in that moment, a gesture so small that almost no one would have noticed it. The man's hand had trembled, his eyes had closed. For just a second, his mask of invisibility had slipped, and David had glimpsed something beneath it. Something vast, something ancient, something that looked like grief. When Sarah left, David moved closer. The man was eating the soup slowly, savoring each spoonful. He did not notice David at first. "Are you really a king?" David asked quietly. The man's head snapped up. His eyes locked onto David's, and for a moment something primal flashed across his face. Recognition, fear, a desperate need to deny or confirm. "Where did you hear that?" the man whispered. "I didn't hear it," David said. I saw it. The way you sat. The way you moved. The way you let that lady give you food, like it was a blessing instead of charity. Kings sit like that." The man stared at the boy for a long moment. Then he slowly reached into his plastic bag and pulled out the wooden object wrapped in cloth. He unwrapped it carefully, revealing a symbol, an intricate carving of a lion and a star, worn smooth by decades of handling. David gasped. "Don't tell anyone you saw this," the man said, wrapping it again. "If you tell anyone, people will come. Bad people. Do you understand?" David nodded, but he was already thinking about who he could tell. There was someone, a social worker named Ms. Chen, who had been kind to him, who had tried to get him into a shelter. She had a phone. She had connections. David did not understand what he had discovered. He only knew that he had found something precious and that he might finally have the currency to buy his way into safety. He did not know that his innocence was about to trigger a chain of events that would bring an entire nation to the brink of upheaval. End of Chapter 3 CTA. Comment where you're watching from. I want to see how far these stories of hope and redemption can travel. Chapter 4. The Shadow Network. There were people in the world who never forgot. People who had invested too much in the old king's disappearance to ever let it rest. Among them was a man named Colonel Osman, who had been the director of the royal security apparatus for 15 years. He had been one of the few people who knew the truth about why the king had disappeared. That truth had been a burden he had carried silently, watching the nation move forward without its ruler, watching the carefully constructed lie hold firm against all inquiries. He had built a quiet network of people who were loyal not to the new government, but to the old king's memory, his legacy, his potential return. When rumors began to surface, vague whispers about a homeless man with the bearing of royalty living under a bridge in a distant city, Colonel Osman did what he had been trained to do. He investigated. He sent agents to observe. He began to piece together evidence. What he discovered disturbed him profoundly. The king was alive. The king was real. And the king was living in conditions that Osman found morally obscene. He had a decision to make. His loyalty to the king demanded that he reach out, that he help extract him from exile and return him to power. But his understanding of the king's choice demanded something else: respect for the sacrifice the man had made, the life he had chosen, the peace he had sought in anonymity. Osman was a soldier, trained in obedience and command structure. These moral ambiguities were not his terrain. So he did what soldiers do when faced with uncertainty. He waited for orders or for a sign. The sign came through a social worker named Ms. Chen, who received a report from a boy about a man living under a bridge who carried symbols of ancient royalty. Chen, trained to report suspicious behavior and potential welfare concerns, filed a report with the city's Mental Health and Social Services Division. That report landed on a desk 3 days later. On that desk, it was read by a bureaucrat who had no idea of its significance, but in the shadows, in the network of people who had been watching for 7 years, it was flagged immediately. Colonel Osman received the information within 24 hours. He knew immediately what he was looking at. After years of searching, after nearly abandoning hope, he had finally found proof. Now, in a secure location across the country, Osman sat with his inner circle and made a decision that would change everything. They would bring the king home, not by force, not by stealth, but through the only method that could work. They would tell him the truth about why he had left, and they would ask him to remember what he had chosen to forget. Chapter 5. The Rain Remembers. The rain fell on the city for 3 consecutive days. It fell on the towers and the streets, on the rich and the poor, with no discrimination. It fell on the underpass where Marcus sat, and it fell on the penthouse where Amara watched the news, and it fell on the secure location where Colonel Osman studied satellite photographs and intelligence reports. Marcus had begun to understand that something was changing. The rhythm of the streets had shifted. There were more people near his underpass now, people who were not homeless, people who moved with purpose, people who watched and observed. He recognized the signs of a hunt. He had orchestrated enough hunts in his former life to know exactly what it looked like from the other side. Sarah came on the 3rd day of rain, and her face was different. There was something she wanted to tell him, but she struggled with the words. She sat beside him under the bridge, something she had never done before, and let the rain soak her coat. "There's a boy," she said finally, "a young boy, maybe 8 years old. He came to my volunteer center and told me something strange. He said he had met you. He said you were a king." Marcus's body went rigid, every muscle tensed, his breath caught in his chest like a trapped animal. "He's just a confused child," Sarah continued, "but he has a drawing. He says you showed him something. I didn't understand what he meant, but I felt like you deserved to know that someone was asking about you. Someone was looking." Marcus stood abruptly. He gathered his plastic bag, his books, the wooden carving. After 7 years of stillness, he moved with sudden, decisive purpose. Sarah tried to call after him, but he was already moving deeper into the underpass, toward the maintenance tunnels that ran beneath the city. He knew those tunnels. He had studied the city's infrastructure the day he arrived, because a king never stops being strategic, even when he is pretending to be a beggar. The tunnels would take him to the river. The river would take him out of the city. But as he moved through the darkness, Marcus found himself asking a question he had not allowed himself to ask in 7 years. Why was he still running? What was he still hiding from? And more importantly, was the peace he had purchased with his exile worth the cost of living as a ghost? Behind him, above him, the city was awakening to the fact that it harbored a king, and that king was about to make a choice that would alter everything. Chapter 6. The reckoning. Colonel Osmond did not wait for Marcus to run. He moved with military efficiency, positioning people at every exit point, not to capture, but to make contact. When Marcus emerged from the maintenance tunnel near the river, he found himself face to face with a woman he had not seen in 7 years. It was Amara. She stood alone, deliberately, with her hands empty and visible. Behind her, at a respectful distance, were 2 other figures, one of them Colonel Osmond himself. "Your Majesty," Amara said, using a title that sounded like a prayer, "I've been waiting for you for 7 years." Marcus did not speak. He could not speak. To speak would be to acknowledge that this moment was real, that his exile was ending, that the choice he had made all those years ago was about to be unmade. "I know why you left," Amara continued. "I know what you discovered about the government, about the corruption that ran so deep that even you couldn't fix it from the inside. I know why you decided that the only moral choice was to walk away, to let the nation move forward without you, to ensure that your disappearance wouldn't become a symbol that divided people further." Tears began to stream down Amara's face, and Marcus realized that she understood. She truly understood the impossible choice he had made. "But the nation is falling apart," she said. "Without the symbol of the crown, without the hope that you represented, people have lost faith. There's corruption still, but now there's also despair. Poverty has increased. The wealthy have consolidated power. Children are living on the streets because the safety net you built has been dismantled." She stepped forward slowly, carefully. "I'm not asking you to come back as a king," she said. "I'm asking you to come back as a man. Come back and speak the truth. Come back and remind people what a leader looks like when they are willing to sacrifice everything for their people. Come back and show them that you never abandoned them. You were always watching, always waiting to see if they would find their own way. And now that they are lost, perhaps they are ready to listen." Marcus looked at Amara. He looked at Colonel Osmond. He looked at the river, which had become a symbol of everything he had tried to escape. If he said yes, everything would change. If he said no, he would spend the rest of his life wondering if his sacrifice had been noble or just cowardice disguised as virtue. The wooden carving felt heavy in his pocket, heavier than it had in 7 years. If this story already touched your heart, hit the like button. It helps this message of redemption reach more people who still believe in second chances. Chapter 7. The Weight of Crowns. The decision came not as a moment of dramatic revelation, but as a quiet knowing that had been building for 7 years. Every bowl of soup, every kind word from Sarah, every moment of peace under the bridge, all of it had been leading to this single point of choice. "I'll come back," Marcus said simply, "but not as a king, as a witness, as a voice for those I left behind." Amara's expression shifted from desperation to something like relief mixed with grief. She knew what he was giving up, the anonymity that had kept him alive, the simplicity of being no one, the peace that comes with erasure. They moved to a secure location, a safe house on the outskirts of the city where Marcus was given clean clothes, documentation, and time to remember who he had been. As he showered the grime of 7 years away, he felt something slipping from him, not just the physical dirt, but a layer of his identity as a ghost, as an invisible man. Colonel Osmond sat with him through the evening, briefing him on what had changed, what remained the same, what had deteriorated in his absence. The numbers were staggering. Poverty had doubled. Child mortality had risen. The safety net had been shredded. "Why did they let it happen?" Marcus asked, his voice rough from disuse. "Because," Osmond said carefully, "a nation needs leadership. Not just policy, but the presence of someone willing to carry the weight of collective responsibility. Without you, there was no symbol of hope, and without hope, corruption flourishes." That night, Marcus lay in a comfortable bed for the first time in 7 years. He did not sleep. Instead, he thought about the boy David, who had recognized something in him that everyone else had missed. He thought about Sarah, whose simple kindness had awakened his dormant humanity. He thought about the millions of people living on streets like the one he had lived on, people who had no kings, no Amaras searching for them, no path home. In the morning, a decision had crystallized. He would not simply return and reclaim his throne. He would return and transform it. He would use the platform of the crown to speak for the voiceless. He would make sure that his years of exile meant something more than escape. It would mean a reckoning. As the sun rose, Marcus stood at the window and watched the city wake. For the first time in 7 years, he felt the weight of the crown return. But instead of oppressing him, it felt like responsibility. It felt like purpose. It felt like a second chance that he had never believed would come. Chapter 8. The Return. The announcement came on a Tuesday morning, broadcast simultaneously across every network, in every language that the nation spoke. A man stepped up to a podium, flanked by members of the cabinet, and spoke words that had been thought impossible. "I am the one who left you 7 years ago," he said simply. "I am the one you thought was dead. I am the one whose disappearance became a silence that has cost this nation dearly. Today, I am here to end that silence." The response was immediate and overwhelming. Social media erupted. News networks went into overdrive. People poured into the streets, some celebrating, some protesting, some simply confused about what this meant for their nation's future. But what captured the public imagination was not the spectacle of a king's return. What captured the public imagination was the story he told about why he had left, and what he had seen in those 7 years of exile. He spoke about the homeless under the bridges. He spoke about children abandoned at bus stations. He spoke about the systemic failures that the palace had chosen not to see while he was in power. He spoke about his epiphany that sometimes a leader must step away from power in order to truly understand powerlessness. He spoke about Sarah and her quiet kindness. He spoke about David and the hope in a child's eyes. He spoke about the moment when he realized that compassion was not something you could mandate from a throne. It was something you had to learn by living alongside those who had nothing. And then, in a move that shocked everyone, he announced the restructuring of every social welfare program in the nation. He announced massive investments in housing, education, and healthcare. He announced that his crown would no longer sit above the people. It would sit in the middle of them, serving them, accountable to them. Not everyone was satisfied. Some wanted him to punish the officials who had allowed corruption to flourish. Others wanted him to simply restore the old systems and reclaim his former power. But the majority of the nation understood something essential, that this king had not returned unchanged. He had returned, transformed. Chapter 9. The Final Blessing. 3 months after his return, Marcus attended a gathering at a newly renovated shelter. The building had once been abandoned, and now it stood as a symbol of the nation's renewed commitment to its most vulnerable citizens. Sarah was there. So was David, who had been enrolled in school and placed with a foster family. Dozens of formerly homeless people gathered to hear the king speak, not from a throne, but from the same floor where they sat. "I was once hidden like you were hidden," Marcus told them. "I was invisible like you were invisible. I learned in those 7 years what I should have understood from the beginning, that every person has worth beyond measure, and that a society that tolerates the invisibility of its most vulnerable has already begun to die." He looked directly at David, and the boy smiled, a smile full of the hope that only children can hold. "I am here today to make a promise," Marcus continued. "The nation will no longer look away from you. We will no longer pretend that poverty is a personal failure. We will no longer accept that some people are worth less than others, and more importantly, we will no longer allow our leaders to forget what it means to be human in the face of suffering. As he spoke, Sarah reached over and squeezed David's hand. The boy's eyes glistened with tears, not of sadness, but of the recognition that the invisible had finally been seen, and in being seen, they had been given back their dignity. The gathering ended with silence. Not the silence of erasure, but the silence of collective acknowledgement. The silence of a nation beginning to remember its own humanity. Later that evening, Marcus stood alone on the same bridge where he had spent 7 years. The city spread out beneath him, glittering with lights, carrying within it all the complexity of human striving and human suffering. He thought about the choice he had made, to return, to speak, to risk everything he had built in exile in order to transform what he had left behind. He thought about whether it had been worth it. And he knew, with the certainty that comes only from having lived on both sides of the divide, that it had.